Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We are at the top of the hour, so we will go ahead and get started. This is another in our NextWave STEM webinars. Today, we are going to focus on design thinking, beginning a drone project. Really excited because this is a little bit of a different approach than we've taken with some of our previous webinars. In our previous webinars, we have really been technology focused. Today, we want to talk a little bit more about specifically ways that you can integrate a new instructional model. For some of you, it's not new at all, but for others, it may be a little bit different to consider project-based learning. And especially with the differences in the ways that you have to approach an instructional model for your students, many of whom are working from home at a distance or even remotely, project-based learning can become a really powerful way to engage our students, even when they're not directly in front of us in the classrooms. So really excited for that today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to repeat these instructions, well, not so much instructions, but guidelines throughout the course of today's webinar. Excuse me. The first is that you will be receiving follow-up documentation today that has the information for our Illinois teachers who are getting PD credit hours. That will be in the same email in which you receive a copy of today's slide deck, as well as a link to the recording for today's presentation. So if you miss anything, if I cover something really quickly, if I'm speaking too quickly, because I can get excited, I'm an excitable person. If I'm speaking too fast, then you miss something, you can always come back and check out what was in that recording. The second thing is that the chat is open. If there is any comment that you have, any questions that you have, anything that you want to share with our entire group, feel free to drop it in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat today. So if there is a question and I don't get to it, don't worry. I will be scrolling through that chat and making sure that I see those questions and I answer them either on air or follow up at the conclusion of today's webinar. So with that being said, we will press forward and we will begin. Oh, we already got a really good question. So the recording of today's webinar will be sent to the email of whomever signed up. The short answer to that is no. I am just sending the webinar recording to those who are in attendance today. If there is a really burning interest for the webinar recording for those who didn't sign up, we can make that available via YouTube. Just let me know. You can email me and we'll get you what you need. So a great place to begin is at the beginning. And that's to talk a little bit about who we are. NextWave STEM is in a really unique position as we are a startup that's focused on emerging technology for students with the perspective of real change. It is critical, we believe absolutely critical, that students have a chance to get hands-on with technologies that will form the foundation of work in the future. And the reason that is, without focusing too much of what's on the slide, is that we have some huge problems. We had huge problems before a majority of our students had to transition into distance learning and learning from home and remote learning. And even now, as we're all making changes, all adapting, we're solving problems every day. Even before this transition, you as a teacher, you as an educator had to solve problems every single day, complex and interesting and sometimes frustrating problems. We believe that technology can be a huge essential benefit for problem solving. We believe STEM is a really powerful lens and a mechanism for students to do that. And we know, we see it in the data that STEM fields are not only in high demand, but there is a low supply of qualified professionals to fill those roles. I truly believe personally, and we believe at NextWave STEM, that the earlier students see themselves not just as consumers of technology, but as producers of technologies, the more qualified STEM professionals you'll see in the future. And those professionals are going to dramatically change the way that we work, the way that we learn, and the way that we teach. Will also solve some really, quite honestly, devastating worldwide problems. So I'm really excited for the next generation of scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematics who will hopefully do a really good job and make sure that I don't have to work so hard when I'm an adult. So that's something I'm looking for personally. So today, we want to focus on three particular goals, not in any equal, well, I wouldn't say that, not in the exact equal measure, but in differing measures and different levels of importance. The first is we want to really work with you and talk through ways to define questions and challenges that students can solve at home. We really want to start with the beginning of project-based learning. So we're going to have to spend a little bit of time and do some background work for those of us who are not familiar, or even if you are familiar and you want to get a deeper understanding of how project-based learning works and the differences and what we've seen from traditional projects. We want to take some time with that. After we talk about project-based learning, we're going to spend a little bit of time and we're going to talk about the role of block-based coding in your drone project. That's a really, really powerful tool that we have available to us. Not just flying the drones manually, but flying autonomously builds in a whole other wrinkle, a whole nother level of rigor, allows us to explore some concepts in computer science and mathematics that we previously would not have been able to explore. And then third, we're going to touch on what your next steps are going to be. How do you build a rubric or rubrics as you move through your processes? What are your assessments going to look like? And while your students might not have access to a drone, the project that we're working with is really relying on computer simulation and simulation based on an app that's free and available to your students. We can already be thinking about those next steps. If my students have drones that they're able to code, or if we put them in their hands, we get them the drones that they need to be able to fly physically. What are those next steps really look like for our students? I will pause for another housekeeping note. My colleague, Sugandhi Chugani, has joined the line and she will be monitoring the chat. So she is going to be able to answer any other particular questions that you might have. And if I miss a question that you ask, she'll be able to direct it to me. And between the two of us, you'll make sure that your questions get answered. So with that all being said, that's a mouthful, we will press forward. Project-based learning. We want to talk about what it is, what it isn't, why it's powerful when it comes to learning with drones, things that we can do to really engage our students at a distance. But the thing about project-based learning is that it's a little bit of a tricky phrase in that we have to define this. I think we have an idea of what a project is. Most of us have been working on some kind of project since the time we were very young students ourselves and have all kinds of projects going on right now. So we want to think about what is project-based learning? What does that even mean? The Buck Institute is an awesome resource when it comes to project-based learning. And I say this awesome because they do a really good job refining definitions and giving resources to educators of all stripes who are looking for ways to make their project-based learning more robust and more effective. And where they begin is with a really, really good definition. Project-based learning is a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to an authentic, engaging, and complex question, problem, or challenge. I love this definition because particularly now we find ourselves and our students with lots of resources that kind of put them directly in the line for a project-based learning experience. There's time. There's time that we might not have thought our students had, and some of our educational goals and outcomes, when we think about what we want to see for a 10-week semester, or a 12-week semester, or even a 15-week trimester, whatever your particular students' classroom setup is, those things may have shifted because of the global climate that we have right now. A little bit of time, and that time may be shorter or longer depending on how much time you have to devote to STEM, now gives us the opportunity to engage with our students in project-based learning. But even more than that, projects are supposed to be authentic. We're not thinking of just abstraction. We're not trying to necessarily make up scenarios that we wouldn't see in the real world. There are situations that could really happen. There's impacts that could really be had on real people, on real users, on society at large. So we are we love project-based learning at NextWave STEM because of the opportunity for multifaceted learning. So the interesting thing with project-based learning is that it's one of those short adages that seems to be really new, but it's got a long history with regards to educational thought, and with even respect to its practice under many different names, with different results and outcomes in different contexts. But this idea of real world learning, engaging with learning that has a real consequence, is literally ancient. Um, Aristotle and Confucius were huge advocates of learning by doing. There's a huge difference between sitting and learning something by rote and actually practicing a craft, practicing an art form, and using it. Socrates, from whom we devise the Socratic method, this idea of always questioning, always being interrogative, always thinking about how we can get more information out of a subject, and thinking critically about that information is something that we engage all the time in project-based learning. From there, when we think about the 19th and 20th centuries, um, we see Dewey, huge advocate of learning by doing. For those of us who are Montessori educators, Maria Montessori uh, is huge influence on this idea that we're just not going to be listening to words. We're moving away from this idea of the sage on the stage, even as I'm doing this webinar as a talking head. But in the real world, we might move away from this idea of the gray old professor dispensing wisdom upon the entire class, and really give options for students to go and really learn at their own pace, learn about things that interest them, learn in different ways, be they kinesthetic or a myriad of different learning modalities. And then Piaget said something really interesting in his work when he talks about making meaning from our experiences, that we're not just working on a task for the sake of the task, but the task means something tangible. And that tangible meaning is something that is heartfelt to us as the learner and heartfelt to us as the teacher. Um, Project-based learning really weaves all of these different ideas in various ways throughout the methodology. So project-based learning, the instructional model, really comes down to 6 steps. And I love steps. I love these defined steps in a project-based learning, because for a lot of us, we are familiar with some step-based instructional models. Some of us have been doing the science fair, either as teachers or as students, for decades. So we understand the scientific method as an instructional model. We understand what the scientific method is designed to do. If you're like me and you've got an engineering background, you understand the engineering design process and understand the steps that are driven there in order to solve some problems. Project-based learning is another system of steps that really helps us get towards our end goal when we think about learning for our students. And today, we want to focus on the beginning. So we're going to start at the beginning and focus on the driving question. What thing are we trying to get done so that our students will center that in everything they do as they learn? So before we talk about the driving question, I want to do a little bit of compare and contrast. The project-based learning instructional model versus the more traditional doing a project. Um, and the interesting thing about the traditional project is that we can think of it if it were a meal, they can think of the project usually as being the dessert. We start a unit, whether it's math or social studies or history or AP government, whatever your subject matter might be, and we launch a unit. And there's usually this little bit of a feedback that we get. There's a lesson, stage on the stage, just sitting in a class that's lecture format, a little bit of a small group maybe, move on to some kind of activity. That's your homework, that's your worksheet. That's the thing that's really easy for us to assess whether or not the assessment is really accurate for learning. May have a difference to do with actual learning style and learning expression. The activity can sometimes be rote. We will end up recycling them, not thinking very deeply about how we construct them from class to class, from year to year. And we do the back and forth. Lesson where I present the content, activity where I assess the content. Lesson activity, lesson activity. Um, we're working through this idea of mastery. Um, we're expecting you to be learning the concept and being able to prove the concept of the activity over and over again. We may give you the chance to refresh, and then we do the assessment. That's your test, that's your quiz. That is the chance for you to prove to me that you've learned what we've been practicing through the activities, that you've learned what I've been sharing through the lessons. And once we have the test, I stamp a letter grade, I give you your percentages. The dessert is kind of the project. That's where we do the little bit of variance. That's our presentation. That might be our YouTube video. That might be our slide deck. That might be our book report. That might be our weather report. That's the differentiated portion that is kind of thrown in usually as an add-on. That's our traditional thought process when we think about a project. And we unfortunately, either intentionally or unintentionally, kind of infantilize the project. Oh, well, here's the fun thing to do now that we've done the serious work of running through our unit. Here's the project, here's your reward, which our students don't even look at it as rewards most of the time. Here's your reward. Let's now do our project. Project-based learning is, I'd say, a little bit different. So laid out here is an example of a project-based learning unit. And I say an example because the great thing about project-based learning is that we can really tailor these steps as we see fit. What we have here, I've color-coded kind of this actual learning unit so that becomes a little bit easier for us to think about who's doing what and when. Things that are color-coded green, you can think about it as being collaborative between an educator and the students. Things that are in blue are actually student-driven. In a Montessori environment, even you can think about those things as being opportunities for student choice, student voice and choice. That's something that's really, really integral to the project-based learning methodology throughout, is voice and choice for your students. And things that are color-coded red are student work only. So that's the chance for the student to come back and think about what they've been doing, what their assessment is telling the teacher, what the teacher is giving them with respect to feedback. And then that becomes the opportunity for students to digest that and push forward to the next phase of the project, but not along a predefined route. Instead, they're going to take this feedback and use that feedback to determine what the next step in the project is going to be. So the interesting thing about project-based learning is that it can kind of be the scary experience because as you're going through, you might not actually know what your student work is going to look like at every single step. You might not know what your student deliverables are going to look like at every step. Um, don't worry, you're not taking your hands off the reins completely as an instructor. Um, you can give them options. You can whittle things down so that you are kind of pushing them into tracks that are more manageable for you. But the options that students can actually run through is really diverse and really varied. Um, so running through this unit, the project launch is really powerful because that's you and the student working together, defining the problem. And it creates the context for the students for everything that they're going to do. And the reason why this is collaborative is that, for lack of a better word, we don't want the problem to be random. We want our instructors there to be working towards rooting the problem in the real world and being something that's applicable to actual people. But from there, when you come to an agreement with your students on what your driving question, what your driving problem is going to be, you enter this phase of student work, activities where they're learning information or learning skills, workshops where you may be bringing in other resources, other professionals to teach them more about a field, subject matter material, skills building, lectures in this situation where students will actually need to share what they already know, disseminate knowledge. Oftentimes we can forget about our students as huge repositories of knowledge themselves. Homework, we may have resources available to them, but we want to give them the opportunity to really practice their research skills and pull that knowledge out. And then labs, we may have some real world observations that we need our students to make. But sometimes the best learning is doing, actually being physically hands-on. After they've done that student work, that's a chance to assess them. How has your learning grown? What did you, what do you know now that you didn't know previously? And how did you get there? What's the quality of that learning? What can you show me? Then you get into the reflection phase where that feedback goes um, to the student or even to the group, as many of our projects are done and as all of our projects in an engineering stand or engineering context are done. With that reflection, students have some choices to make, thinking about their goals, thinking about what they're learning and what they want to continue to learn now until what the next phase of work may be. It may be anything that's in those previous phases, these rhombuses here that are pointing towards our first benchmark, or they may be new student activity. They may be simulations. We may be building models and actually running through scale simulations of what happens either digitally or in the real world. They may be discussions. We may be bringing in members of our community. We may be focused on members of our class. We may be focused on previous classes who have done the work before. Um, it may be more research. It may be reading. It can be interviewing our target end user, or it may be interviewing those who sit on the opposite side of an issue. And it may be even a quiz. It may be interrogating our other class members about the driving question and building our insight that way. So we've got a little bit of a loop. Our assessment, our benchmark for our students, measuring the difference, the delta in that learning, to another reflection, and then into another round of student activity. And then we get to our final events. Really critical phase here because this is really where we see the differentiation come out. That final event may be a paper, maybe an abstract, maybe a traditional science fair style trifold, maybe a physical product. If I were thinking about this from a 3D printing standpoint, my students may come together and actually print a physical object for people to use to see if it actually works. And the really amazing thing here is that it's learned and led by the participants. So they're the ones who are contacting members of the community. You've got a leaky faucet. I may have devised and 3D printed a brand new flange that will never leak again. Um, Let me present it to you so that you can use it in your house and you let me know what's going on, or let me present it to the principal, or let me present it to the alderman or the local business council. They're really driving this work forward when it comes to their learning. And then we as instructors get that amazing opportunity to give them the final reflection of the project, thinking about the grand scheme of things, the difference between what they knew at the very beginning of their product or the very beginning of the project and now at the end of the project where they made something that actually makes a big difference. We can see here that the project-based learning methodology allows for really in-depth learning. It's a chance for our students to learn how to tap into passions that they might not have known that they had themselves. And there's an opportunity here to take lots and lots of time as we go. So I want to pause and kind of leave this up on the screen because I want to be a little bit more interactive than we sometimes are here at NextWaveSTEM with our webinars. So I'm going to give us 60 seconds. And in that 60 seconds, I want us to consider what we see here as our student work, things that are highlighted in blue. Are there other examples of student work, those things that you would have your students doing that you would want to include? I'm going to set myself actual 60-second timer. And in that time, I just want you to drop into the comments. What are the other things that you would love for your students to do as they're learning more and pulling out about a subject? And I'm going to make sure I'm going to be quiet during this time so you can think. Melissa says, in discussion, yes, really, really powerful, especially when you think about who's in our discussion. What different point of views can we take? Oftentimes we pull in just the instructor and the students, but discussing with other people who know a lot more and have different viewpoints can be an amazing experience. Really good example, Melissa. I'll give us just another couple of seconds. We're past the minute, but I want to make sure that anybody else who wants to share can. Awesome. We will keep pressing forward. Discussion, creating, feedback, research, all of these different avenues that our students can go down really add in this amazing layer of student voice and choice that honestly makes or breaks a really good project-based learning experience. Oh, Sugandhi. Sugandhi added a really good one. Peer review or feedback. A really good example. There's a huge difference between what peer review would look like at the K or first grade level than at the high school level. We're learning constantly soft skills and how to give constructive feedback to our peers. And the way that our peers work will inform our own learning. Really powerful situation that we can put our students in as they're getting used to growing in their academic skills. And for some of our students, a really great way to preview what they will experience in academia. Great examples to choose there. Well, now we want to get a little bit more to nitty gritty. How can we choose a really good driving question? Some driving questions are better than other questions, just like generally speaking, some questions are better than other questions. We want to know, how do we choose a driving question considering that we're bringing a drone into the mix? Well, the way that I think about defining a really good driving question, the very start of our project-based learning experience, I think of it in the context of pulling something from the headlines or pulling something from the living room. And the way that I define that is to think about what we see lots of people talking about in terms of being challenges or problems, and then what's a personal challenge or problem, something that you're talking about a lot, something that your family might be talking about, something that your close community is talking about. There are lots of different ways that we hear challenges and problems communicated to us. And if we're paying attention and we're kind of saving those things, putting them in the back of our mind for recall later, they can serve as a basis for choosing a driving question in the future. We can contextualize that as either local, state, national, or international challenges or problems. But we have to think a little bit deeper. We, for example, might not necessarily want to consider the question of how can I use drones to fight extraterrestrial life? That might not be the best driving question because we might not have a whole lot of access to the subject of extraterrestrial life other than fiction. There's a little bit of work. There is actual study being done, but that might not be accessible to us, even though it's an international concern and a legitimate concern. So legitimate that NASA has protocols for extraterrestrial life. We just might not have NASA's resources. So of course, we have to consider thinking deeply, thinking critically about what our driving problem might be. What is a problem that currently exists, a real world problem right now? We might not focus on how to avoid the bubonic plague because we've gotten over that a couple hundred years ago. Secondly, we want to think about what tools do we have available to solve the problems? Not just generally, but what tools do I physically have available to me? What research, what resources, what professionals, what personal knowledge, what knowledge of my peers, whether they be educators or professionals in the field that I'm teaching about. And then physical resources. That can be technology, that could be curricula, that could be software and hardware. Um, what do I have available and what do my students have available? We want to have something that's available to the both of us. And then third, how can I ensure that those who the problem is being solved for are actually receiving a real solution? And I want to pause here because this is a really important question when we think about, especially from the engineering standpoint, that E in STEM. The solution is not good, is in fact inherently bad if the person for whom you're solving the problem for doesn't actually get their need. If I go to someone and say, or to back that up a little bit, and they say to me, I have a huge problem of getting my groceries. And I say, okay, no problem. Let me talk to drivers. Let's work out a pay structure. Let's talk to other people who need grocery delivery. We're going to put together a system to make sure that you get your groceries. So drivers are put in place, delivery people are put in place, the restaurants are on board, the grocery stores are on board. We have a whole delivery system put in place now, and I've got trucks flying, I've got groceries flying. But I never took the time to figure out that the reason why this person has a problem getting their deliveries is that people can't find their door. I never actually gave them a real solution. I've done a whole lot of work and I've created a solution for others, and I've created some ancillary problems for others. And I may have even exacerbated the problem that I was originally trying to solve, all because I didn't understand what the real solution would be. That solving, that coming with a real solution for the person or people you're solving for constantly requires feedback, communication. Part of the student work that's done throughout the course of a project, but should absolutely be done right at the very beginning. Honestly, before the beginning, it's a conversation about what do you need? What is your problem? How can we define that? How can we understand it? And then working with you over time as the end user to solve that problem. So I know that's kind of deep. For some people, that kind of might sound like common sense, but it's actually something that problem solvers lose sight of all the time. We get so wrapped up into what we can do with our tools that we forget to prioritize the person who we're solving a problem for. Conversation, communication becomes critical as we solve those problems. And I have to say that last little bit of alliteration there wasn't on purpose, but I'm going to try to remember that one so I can use that one later on. So what are examples? What are actual concrete examples of driving questions that we can solve using drones? Well, let's take a look at the local, state, and national level. Have a few examples here. Local, how might we observe the traffic in the neighborhood? I live in a neighborhood where there are not a whole lot of one-way streets, but I live on one of those one-way streets. And the reason why the street is a one-way street is because the street is narrow. And once upon a time, community members were concerned about the way traffic flows through this part of my town. The police department and civic center is right around the corner. There's lots of traffic in and out. There's a fire station there. There's public services and people who are always in their commutes, and they want to make the neighborhood more safely or more safe to commute around and traverse, even on foot. The drone may be a tool that we can use to make observations of traffic patterns. That becomes a local problem that the drone has equipment, actual physical equipment, to give us some feedback on. At the state and national level, how might we establish safer drone operation around airports? There is federal regulation with regards to flying drones, and that federal regulation exists primarily for the purposes of protecting airports and passengers who fly, the general flying public. In the aughts, in the time between 2000 and 2009, we saw this explosion of access to drone technology. And we also saw an explosion in the number of people who are flying their drones dangerously close to airports. So there are laws around that, but is there something that we can be doing more on a local, at a state level, on a national level with the FAA to inform those laws and make them better? Thinking about John Q flying public, thinking about the drone operators and what people are flying drones for and why. And then internationally, how do we establish international rules for drone usage? There's one thing to be able to fly drones nationally, dealing with a small group, a small political body, people who are able to come together in whatever political system they have to make some rules. There's difference when we think about what does that mean across international lines. Would it be illegal to use a drone to fly passengers from one country to another? Is it legal for countries to use drones for the purposes of warfare? These are questions that in large part are undecided. And our students can actually think about ways that they can use their drones either physically as real objects or even in simulation to get towards some of those answers. So I want to pause again because I know I've opened the fire hose and I've hit you with quite a bit, but I want to pause for another minute and I want to give us the opportunity. What are ways that we can actually use drones to solve some driving questions? And you don't have to think about the biggest question in the world. You can grip something from the headlines. There's a headline today that I saw just about drones that I shared with our team at NextWaveSTEM. What are some driving questions that you might want to use drones to explore with your students? And I'm going to, once again, shut my mouth for the next minute. The chat is open. And I'm going to encourage you, don't be shy. I'm sure that nobody's going to have a bad suggestion or a bad idea. Well, Jen had an interesting driving question. She says, looking at our high school parking lot, what works and doesn't work when students and parents are leaving after school? That is an amazing driving question. Thinking about this localized question here of traffic flow, something that schools have been trying to solve for literally for decades, has this interesting urban design appeal, and even city planning angle. We can be looking at ideas around demographics. What's the difference in the actual number of students who have been coming and leaving the school over time? What's the difference in the actual number of cars that have been coming and leaving the school over time? What was the school parking lot actually originally designed for? Has the parking lot been changed? Has it been altered? And what does the drone show us about what's working in the patterns? And even by taking pictures with the drone, can we map out and see what works and doesn't work and extrapolate that? Um, there's even some scientific learning opportunities. Um, Anybody who's studied traffic a little bit, traffic actually behaves like a fluid. The same way that, or some of the same principles that guide the way that water moves through a pipe or that air moves through a pipe, applies to the way that traffic moves on a highway. So it's really, really interesting, all the different avenues that we can go down by just pointing the drone at the school parking lot. Really, really cool driving question, Jen. Oh, Melissa added a good one. How can we educate the public on what current drone laws um, that changes are regularly? Okay, so my grammatical skills are broken down here at the end, but what I'm thinking I'm reading from Melissa is a question about what the public currently knows about flying drones and the way those laws are actually changed and how often they're changed. Um, Really, really cool because this project actually brings up actual ethical considerations. What is the right way and wrong way to use a drone? How would operating our drone in spaces be viewed? That might be a learning by doing in terms of actually going into spaces and operating a drone and testing those systems and those mechanisms. Something that I do not advocate, but one could could theoretically try, is asking a restaurant owner for permission to fly a drone inside the restaurant and engaging what the response is going to be from the general public, from the restaurant employees. Notice I said asking for permission first. Do not tell your students to fly a drone inside someone's restaurant without their permission. But that's an example of thinking about how our drones actually function in physical space and what we need to know. That project becomes civic based, and it's a really, really powerful learning opportunity. These are great, awesome driving questions and really expose some of the different subject matter that we can cover in the project-based learning methodology. So I'm really excited because it sounds like some of our educators are going to be able to hit the ground running when they integrate project-based learning into their at distance instructional models. So now we want to shift a little bit because we've talked about drone flying generally, but the awesome thing about our drone platform technology that we use is we want to make sure that it's available to our students who don't have access to a physical drone. And that's where this idea of getting coding involved comes in. The question now becomes, okay, great, drones are awesome. I can use them to test a whole bunch of different things, but I might not be able to test anything if my student doesn't have access to a drone. Will any drone do? Like, give me a physical tool here, Desmond, or a lot of this may be for naught. Well, let's give you a physical tool. And that physical tool is actually an app. It's an app that's available on iOS. It's available on Android, Chromebooks, if your students have Chromebooks, and if they're school supplied Chromebooks, those Chromebooks will have to be configured by your integrated technology specialist, your instructional technology specialist to run Android applications. Tello EDU is free to use. You don't have to come out of your own pocket. Your students don't have to come out of their pocket. You can download it for the Android store or iOS store. And it allows you to do Scratch programming of a drone. For those of you who aren't familiar with Scratch, no worries. We're going to take a look at it in 1 second. It's block-based. So instead of your students worrying about typing out the code correctly, being concerned if they miss a semicolon and now nothing works, you're literally just putting blocks together. If the blocks can snap together, the drone will be able to execute the code. The machine will be able to follow the instructions that you're giving it. And that's all fine and good. Great. Okay, it's free. It's easy to use. There's Scratch coding. But once again, Desmond, what if my students don't have a drone? The killer feature, I would say, is that there's a simulation. Baked into the app is the ability to simulate what a flight will look like. And that is also free. Question from Jessica. Does the Scratch coding program also show resultant written code? Yes, it does. You actually can't get away from it at all. And we'll show what that looks like. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to transition my screen share over because we're going to just take a look at the program in action. So what you should be seeing now is the Tello EDU program up and running. I'm running an emulator, just another program that will simulate the Android application running on my computer. And running this emulator, you'll be able to see exactly what the code will look like for your students as well. This is the home screen. And on the home screen, all you would need to do is click on this green puzzle piece. And the green puzzle piece takes you to what's called the coding environment. So let's click on that puzzle piece now. Having a little bit of a snafu, but now we're back. So in our coding environment, bot-based coding is drag and drop. Scratch is another name for a type of block-based coding that underpins this. And it's giving instructions to a machine. So if I go over to this menu on the left, a drone in its essence is a flying robot. There's motion involved. In fact, it would not be a robot if there weren't motion involved. So I can grab instructions, these instructional blocks, and I can grab them with my finger, drag and drop them in a particular order. So I don't have to actually type out the instructions. I'm able to grab pieces of code that allow me to give instructions for what I want the machine to do. And I'm putting some instructions together that I'm going to demonstrate in just a moment because they relate to kind of what I have in my head for a potential driving question. So at all times, I'm able to see the actual instructions that I've given or that I intend to give to my drone, the machine that flies. If I click on this eyeball icon on the lower left-hand side of the screen, what will happen is that it transitions over to my simulator. I'm actually gonna drag these instructions, this code off to the side. This is a 3D representation of the drone that connects to the software. The drone is also called the Tello drone. NextWaveSTEM, you can kind of think of us as well as your one-stop shop when it comes to the STEM resources that you need when it comes to robotics, drones, and 3D printing. That means that contact us, our school partnership manager, Segundi, who will throw her email in the chat box. we can talk to you about getting you and your students the drones that they need to execute the programs. They would actually physically connect their drones via Wi-Fi to make their drones fly, but we have this simulation program that becomes extremely powerful for us and our students. So the driving question that I might have, and this is something that's really, really quick, there's no associated slide here. The driving question that I have is there a way to use a drone to make my neighborhood safer? That's a question that comes up quite often when we think about the uses for drones. And I might be the one who says, okay, I would love to prototype a drone neighborhood watch. Instead of having my usually elder neighbors take time out of their day to peek out the window and look and see what people are doing, maybe I'd make the flying robot do that instead. And it might even serve as a crime deterrent. How could I program the robot to move, to fly through the air to accomplish that? Well, students would need to learn about scratch coding. They would need to learn about programming knowledge. They would need to learn about units of distance, as there's distance involved here. They would need to learn about angle measures. And once they have all that knowledge put together, they can write a short program like what I've written here. And when I press the button, tap to start, it will actually simulate my drone flying a pattern in the air, flying a very, very simple square. Now, what we are able to see is this abstract idea of a drone flying through space. And that's what the simulation allows for our students, the ability to fly in abstraction. They're not just stuck thinking about what should happen, but they can physically see an example of what should happen. And I can rotate the screen a little bit so we can see that drone from a different vantage point. And then my drone is going to land. So the computer science comes in at that point, that it becomes another avenue, another mechanism for our students to do some self-guided work that actually contributes to their learning in the project. So I'm going to now transition my screen share back to our slide deck, because we are actually running short on time quickly. I'm long-winded and excited, so I've got to squeeze our our last few slides here in at the end. So my apologies for that. I'm focusing on, at this point, on the student-led work. Things like activities, research, learning about drones and drone laws, the sensors that are available on the drones, modeling the real world in abstraction, then flying those simulations. They're critical, and they're things that your students are able to do using drone simulation software and other resources. All these parts and pieces can feed into the project-based learning experience for our students. And NextWaveSTEM, with our curricula, with our equipment, we can help guide you in the direction that you need to go as well. So thinking about what's next, assessments, rubrics, next steps, what do you need? Well, that's where we come into NextWaveSTEM. That's the kind of the cliffhanger here. In addition to your PD credit hours that you would receive, you're also going to be getting access to all of our NextWaveSTEM curricula for free. Go log in, sign up, you'll get a username. Take a look at those lessons, use the lessons, think about the ways that you can adapt them and make them work for your classroom learning experience. But also connect with us so that you could have a chance to take a look and see if the equipment is going to fit your needs. And NextWaveSTEM is also continuously providing professional development. Maybe there's something that you've got a choke point on, or you might not have any experience with scratch coding or block-based coding at all. Our professional development moves you in the direction that you need to go. For those of you, I think we all probably did a really good job since we're on the line right now. But if you need connection to professional development, nextwavestem.com/pages/professional development. Our whole list and lineup of professional development opportunities are available there. And As of today, there are professional development opportunities running through the first week of July. We've got things scheduled right before the July 4th holiday. So check them out and see if there are ways that we can continue to help you and enrich your learning and what you're doing with your students in the classroom. But we would also love to connect with you on social media and through traditional email as well. In the corner of your screen or wherever you put my face is probably my face in color. That's my face in black and white. Desmond at NextWaveSTEM. I'm the program coordinator. And that means that I do a lot of curriculum writing, but also professional development. And I can point you in the right direction for where you need to go when it comes to technology. But we are on the most social media platforms. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we are on LinkedIn, we are on Facebook. We have not made it to TikTok yet. And I'm excited about the time where we can get someone who cares about TikTok. But I am not that person. So until we get that team member who cares about TikTok, we won't be there. But we're hopeful to get there in the future. So I want to pause at this point and leave the floor open for any questions that you might have, literally about anything. If it's housekeeping, if it is thinking about driving questions, if it's thinking about the next steps of project-based learning, we can dig into them in the couple minutes that we have. And this is another opportunity, again, for me to kind of shut my mouth. The comments are open. Well, the chat is open for your comments. Oh, yes. I'm going to open the microphone actually for Segundi, who has a little bit of an extra announcement. This is the part that I forgot because it is brand spanking new. We're also really excited for that. So Segundi, tell us more about what's happening remotely.
All right, thanks, Des. Thanks for an awesome webinar as usual. So at NextWaveSTEM, we are working on making sure that your students are getting these live STEM classes. And I know that kids are doing so much remote learning already. You know, it's becoming a little bit of an overload, but what we're trying to do at NextWaveSTEM is make sure that we have some interactive things to offer. Desmond went through a couple of tips and tricks with regards to bringing some of the stuff to life, and our classes are totally about that. And all the students would require, if they are interested in joining, is a good internet connection and some sort of device. We're actually also offering a class where kids, if they want, can purchase their own drone, their own 3D printer, their own robotics kit, and they'll have an instructor on the other side of the computer to walk them through it. So we have a bunch of options. Feel free to check out our link. You can always reach out to Desmond or myself with any questions you have, and we're happy to answer all of them, point you in the right direction, all that good stuff.
Thanks so much, Segundi. Really, really appreciate that. Segundi is awesome. So by all means, reach out to her and she can give you more information about our distance learning and remote learning options. Thanks so much again, Segundi. Our chat is pretty quiet so far. So that means that either everybody is bored out of their minds or I did an amazing job. Either way, I am so thankful for each and every one of you guys for being in attendance. Oh, Jessica Torres asked a really good question. Have you guys ever seen, thought of drones made by 3D printing a shell? Yes, we have thought about that quite a bit. And the amazing thing about 3D printing the drone is that it becomes such an amazing integrative experience. They're using one emerging technology to produce another emerging technology and then having to troubleshoot both of those processes. There's integrated circuits, there's programming. There is the actual running and design of the 3D printer. So cool, so fun. Myself, I haven't gone that direction because there's also a little bit of a risk factor involved as well when you've got flying objects that are being made by students. That's something that we could definitely see us doing in the future, expanding on, and maybe I just need to eat my Wheaties and get a little bit of courage, but that's something I would absolutely encourage you to explore more in. Great question, Jessica. Well, everyone, it is that time. Thank you so much. If you've got any questions, reach out to me, Desmond at NextWaveSTEM. If you want to make connections with our school management partner, that's Agundi at NextWaveSTEM. Be on the lookout today for an email before the end of business that gives those PD credit hours a copy of the slide deck for today, and also the link to the recording of today's webinar. Thanks, everyone, and we will talk to you again soon.